Welcome everyone, welcome. Welcome to another episode of Son of Elijah. My name is Mac the Lion, and I'm your host for this program. Today, we're delving into the dynamics of witchcraft and what it involves and what it's all about as related to the series that we had just concluded on exposing the water kingdom, on exposing the institution that lies at the belly of the great waters, which is Mystery Babylon. And we're going to connect it because at the very lowest level of the workings of wickedness of the earth, you have to understand that Babylon's primary agents are witches, or the artistry of witchcraft that is being executed on the earth. Now, I will start first by clarifying the dynamics or the layers to witchcraft. As you know, the human is made up of spirit, soul, and body. We are spirit beings, we have a soul, and we live in a body. Now the depths of that which pertaineth to humans is spiritual. The spiritual is where the depths are, and that's why Mystery Babylon is a major player here, because from the depths they operate and execute the fullness of their functionality, targeted to hit the spirit man and then move over to the soul, controlling the soul of man, the thoughts of man through the instruments of iniquity, and then ultimately through the forces of disobedience to get man to sin and act contrary to that which God has for them to do. But all that starts first with corrupting the spirit man. So the spirit of witchcraft, or witchcraft, is an artistry of manipulation that is designed to not only bind spirit beings, but also to get them to be corrupted and ruined at the end of the day, so that their thinking can be constantly barraged with a certain understanding that is contrary to their existence, and then ultimately they can act in contradiction of that which is against their very existence. So at the end of the day, they fail, because witchcraft is the power of darkness. Witchcraft is the force or the instrument that is being used by the individuals that operate from the depths of the waters to corrupt, to manipulate the minds of many onto deception, and ultimately to seduce their body onto sinning and being ruined at the end of the day. So that is what makes them as agents of darkness. Now, if that be the case, that we are layered into three, that means witches are also categorized into three. Now, there are witches that operate solely from the depths of the spirit man. Then we have the witches that operate from the body or the physical realm. And then we have the witches that operate mostly from the mind. Now, I will take you through them very quickly. Now, witches that operate from the spirit are the witches that use the depths and the core of who they are to power their manipulation and the things that they do practically even on the earth. Because the spirit man is from where everything is executed from. The spirit man is from where every manipulation is done. The spirit man is where every counteraction is done. The spirit man is from where everything is actually done, manipulated, executed, and brought about a certain tenacity or temperature of results that they actually desire. Then we come to the mind. The mind has to do with witches who use their esoteric mindset to be able to function, and by so doing are able to still manipulate people's lives. So the witchcraft that operates from the mind are individuals that walk through the esoteric thinking of the human soul in order to project thoughts that are contradictory, and at the end of the day produce manipulative behaviors that will wane or deceive or contravene that individual to be controlled, because a controlling spirit. And then the last but not the least is the witch that operates from the physical, and by depending on the physicality of things, by depending on the actions that they are told to do or execute, or things they are meant to get involved with or comply with, those actions are also bringing about manipulation. So you have to understand that witchcraft is manipulation, spiritual manipulation, soulical manipulation, and physical manipulation. And all that is being executed from the very depths of the waters. Is being executed from Satan, is being executed from the wicked one and from the forces of darkness. Now, there is no concept that can contravene this principle, because you need to understand how they operate and the forces and the power behind how they do. First of all, let me start with the depths of witchcraft. Now, the depths of witchcraft are witches who have their base operating from the core of who they are. They don't require an environment. They don't require an elevation. They don't require a cave. They don't require an altar. They don't require anything. The only thing they need to bring to this party to qualify is the core of who they are. So what do I mean by that? What I'm trying to say is these are individuals who operate out of the depths of who they are. And your depths is at the core of your belly. Now, I have to make a distinction here so that you can understand something. What makes someone a witch is someone that has powers that are lodged within the core of who they are, of which is them having a certain entity that functions and launches and operates from the depth and the core of the core of their existence, which is witchcraft. Now, the core of their existence is the womb. What makes a witch's power work is the power of the womb. Let me explain to you what I mean. You see, there is a muscle that is beneath the navel within the abdomen of every female. In that muscle is the duct or the passageway through which spirit beings get housed internally, and that housing is a formation process. The Bible says the same way you do not know how bones form in the womb of a woman. Why? Because that is the recreation point. That's where humans are formed. When spirit beings attach themselves supernaturally to a conception that occurs within the four walls of that muscle, actually identified as the womb, growth occurs. And the growth process is the process wherein that human spirit that has attached itself to that conception is now picking up flesh. And the formation process is literally spiritual, wherein that which started his journey as a spirit being now eventually becomes a human being or a humus being, because the word humans or human simply means a soil being. Because man was made from clay, man was made from soil. That's why it's called humus being. So that being that is growing in the womb of a woman is actually an individual that started his journey spiritually, but now is putting on flesh. And now there is a formation process occurring in the very core of that woman. And that formation process means that eventually after 9 months, a child will be ready to enter the earth. A child will be ready to be born. So the womb possesses intricate power that God has given it to become the channel through which humans are able to penetrate the earth. That's why every spirit that is on the earth is functioning. Every demonic, satanic spirit on the earth is a usurper who took power over from man, because they were not born creatures. These individuals entered the planet by usurping power from man. Now, the power of the entrance of humanity, which is life being born and life being manifested into the physical, that ductway, that passageway occurs through the growth process that is implanted within the four walls of the womb, because after conception there is implantation of a fertilized egg, and then that immediately plants itself in the four walls of the womb, where it begins to draw blood and draw power, under which the formation process now starts. And if that continues without interruption, in the next 9 months we should have a full-blown human born into this world, and then ready to accomplish or run with the purpose for which God has created them. So you have to understand that the power of the womb is one of the most powerful things that God put in place. Now, the power of witchcraft is this: a demonic spirit in form of a snake implants itself. Because you have to understand, have you seen a fertilized egg before? When it's traveling through the membrane of the womb to actually implant itself, you will see that it looks somehow like a tadpole. So in a way also, it looks like a tiny incy snake. You have to understand. So what happens is this: the spirit of witchcraft, it's like a small snake because it actually has to grow in that womb. That's why it's an implantation that occurs wherein a tiny snake-like spirit embeds itself into the four walls of a womb. And when it embeds itself there, it begins to grow in power. And systematically and gradually, it will start speaking to that individual who has that womb and start showing them things and start taking them out of their body. Because as the womb begins to mature, that also how that snake begins to grow. That's why most people who are witches today actually picked it up from childhood, because a snake was minted out to them that planted itself in the very four walls of the womb and started tapping from the power that God has put within them. And because the woman is the only creature amongst the sexes that has the power to cycle out. Men don't cycle. No, men don't cycle, only women do. In short, every 28 to 30 days, they cycle out. And that cyclical order means that they replenish their power. So every time a woman who is of an adult formation process, wherein she has entered or gone beyond the puberty stage, what happens is this: when the womb prepares or draws power from the blood, after about 28 days, it sheds that power, and then it replenishes itself and draws blood all over again. And that's what we know as the cycle or the period. Now, that cyclical functionality is exactly what Satan taps into by implanting a snake in the very four walls of young girls. So when they begin to puberty, gradually and systematically, that power begins to grow. The growth of that power is being re-engineered as the cyclical functionality starts. And with that cyclical functionality, gradually that snake begins to grow. And as that snake begins to grow, the strength of that snake begins to magnify, because witchcraft is actually a snake. If you ask anyone that consciously professes to be a witch, especially those who call themselves sangomas and or people who are into such functionalities, they will tell you clearly that they have a snake that is nicely curled around their spine, and then the tail of that snake is implanted in the very underbase of their womb, because that's where the power from which they are able to project, from which they are able to leave their body, from which they are able to communicate with the depths of the waters, and we're able to get data and information on anyone. That is how he operates. Please listen to me, because I'm an authority in this subject. I don't study it. I don't have time for that. Everything I know is a functionality of battles won, spirits that have been stripped of such powers, and then they have no option than to give up the information that I require. That is how we get it. That's why it is 100% authentic. So you need to listen very carefully on the dynamics of the power base of the witchcraft spirit. That is why what I'm trying to explain to you makes perfect and educated sense, because that's why a man cannot be a witch. Why? Because he does not possess a womb. Even though a man can practice witchcraft, and we will deal with how men come into the picture, but as it regards the woman, she doesn't require to function outside her power base, because at the very tip end of her womb lies her power base, and that snake curls itself nicely and then implants itself at the very belly of the womb, and from there draws power that it requires for you to grow. And so when the young girl now begins to mature and cycle out, that power is replenished every month, literally, and by the replenishment of that power, that snake also grows. And then gradually they'll be given assignments to use, because you have to feed the snake, because the snake eats the corruption of flesh. That means that snake, its target is to reduce the destinies and the purposes of people to nothing. So that reduction is also what we call the power of the grave. And that reduction is a deprecation of lives and purposes. So when that witch begins to attend the coven, because every witch has a coven they belong to, literally. It's usually many a times in their community or in the place where they were raised. So they already belong to a group of people, and since there is is no distance in the realm of the spirit. They show up at meetings. Now, without diverting or digressing, because I want to take this thing in layers so that we can understand the dynamics of witchcraft. So first of all, just as we have a fertilized spermatozoa that has fertilized an egg move through the membrane of the womb, that's the same way a small snake has been given to a specific individual, a female, at a certain young age, and at a point in time, that snake now implants itself at the very tip end of the womb. And then as that individual begins to grow, that snake begins to grow a bit. But the speed of the snake does not grow as much until their power really begins to come. And the power comes when the womb begins to cycle itself out, because there's power in blood. You have to understand that there is power in blood. So because in the blood is the life, and in that life is power. So what happens is this: when that snake implants itself in the very tip end of the womb, it's able to draw nourishment, and that nourishment is the power that is within the blood membrane of the womb. So when it cycles out, or when that young girl now enters into puberty and begins to generate the cyclical power of building up blood in the four walls of the womb, every 28 days, that is what produces a period. And within that timeline, that snake draws power. That snake draws power, and that power is replenished every 28 days. And that is the secret of the strength of the spirit of witchcraft. Now, that snake in itself is what makes that person a witch. If the person doesn't have that snake implanted its tail at the very tip end of the womb, that person is not a witch. So a witch is not a behavior, it's not how someone talks, it's not how someone functions, it's not how someone looks scary. No, someone may look like a hag, someone may look unkept. It doesn't make them a witch. A witch could be a smooth, sweet talker who has Queen's proficient English and functions and carries themselves in the highest quality of living, but yet they possess a snake sitting right in their very belly, in their womb. Remember when Jesus said, out of your belly shall flow rivers of living water. If you go and read that direct translation, that word belly there actually is the word womb. It says, out of your womb shall flow rivers of living water. Remember, when a child is being formed in the womb, it is formed in water, and that which is the amniotic fluid or the amniotic sac, and that which there is amnio flowing within that woman, there is a sac containing water within the core of the woman, and that's where the formation process of the child occurs. You have to understand that it is that life, because anytime there is life, there is fluid, and that fluidity is water, and that water is extracted from the blood. And that water is life. For out of your womb shall flow rivers of living water. So the womb in itself carries water, and that water is being extrapolated from the blood. Now, you wouldn't see the water literally, but when women cycle out, they actually discharge blood, but that blood contains water, and that's why it's even able to weep and flow out. Now, you need to understand why I'm going a little bit into this, because I want you to understand the power and the dynamics of how this spirit functions and from where it operates. So now, people normally become witches by initiation. Someone has to assign them a snake, and that snake is normally a baby snake that is given to them to grow in their womb. That's why most people who join witchcraft have already done that in childhood. That's number one. Number two, most people who have witchcraft in them did not literally sign up for it. It was given to them. So if you have a grandmother or a great-grandmother who is a witch or who is a sangoma, or anyone who has that in their bloodline, they will most likely try and pass that spirit over into the young females that are in their household. Fortunately for the setting, there are children that will never accept it. Their spirit is so strong, as it were, rejected, while there are some that just takes it up almost immediately. That's why there are people who, some people will come to them and say, you are meant to be a this, you are meant to be a that. Many a times it's because they have already been separated and minted a snake, a baby snake that is to grow with them. And the growth of that snake will be determined by them showing up for those meetings, because once that snake is given to that child, they have the ability to show up in meetings. Now, that snake is what will bring them out, because without that snake, they can't fly. You've heard the term, they say witches fly. Not with a broom. That one, is a character created by the Disneys of our world. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ability to fly. And that flight is a functionality of that snake, because that snake actually flies. That snake is a flying snake. It flies through the air. It uses the power that it has to be able to project that individual and take their spirit out of their body to be able to show up in meetings and do things without literally leaving their physical body. So without literally getting out of bed, they are lying on that bed, but their spirit is gone. So they show up in meetings, and when they are given assignments, it is still that spirit that will make it happen. Now that is how witchcraft is actually built and formed, and that witchcraft is actually at the base level. Now the smallest component of this principle you must understand is that little snake. Now that snake will grow in time as that person begins to give themselves to it. Initially it will look like dreams, like as if they are just having dreams or nightmares, or when they see older people every time they sleep, or they appear in covens. They won't know initially it's covens. They may just think that there is this woman, there is this person I see in my dream all the time. What they don't know is that they have been invited to a meeting, because whoever births that snake is the one who calls it to come. What do I mean by that? See, there's usually a mother snake. A mother snake is an old witch that has been in the craft for long, and over time she's able to reproduce those snakes. And then when she releases those snakes, she uses the baby snakes to initiate the young girls that are around her in order for her to now become a matriarch, as it were, over a great number of witches. So when she calls for a meeting, everyone that is from the mother snake will beckon on all the persons that are carrying the small snakes and bring them to the meeting. So automatically they all show up, and the reason they show up is because the mother snake has called for the meeting, and that meeting is on a daily basis. I've had to fight spiritual entities wherein a mother snake, I grabbed its neck and I've twisted it very hard, and that snake was doing everything it was trying to do to release its baby snakes. I could see all the little snakes all living in its belly. I could see them innumerable. I could see them, and what she wanted to do was to open her mouth and release them. And once she releases them, now they are loose, and now they are on assignment. They've already been given exactly what they are meant to do. So they hear the callings of their great mother snake, and that great mother snake is actually the head witch that runs the coven. And from that coven, she's able to manipulate all the destinies of all the people around her using the small snakes that she has sent. And those snakes implant themselves in the little ones who are able to receive it, because that snake normally needs to grow, and they normally attach themselves before that little girl hits her puberty, so that she's well entrenched before the power begins to come. You have to understand the power and the dynamics of this. That is why witches naturally don't like to get pregnant, because a baby being born or growing in the womb interrupts the power cycle, and immediately she cannot weep anymore, she cannot have periods anymore until after the baby is born. So that interrupts the power cycle, and that's why witches become weaker during the time, or their power wane when they are pregnant. And that's why naturally witches don't like to be pregnant. They don't like to be. A real core witch does not want to be pregnant, because the pregnancy interrupts her power base. Because the presence of a child growing in the womb suspends the cyclical order that replenishes her power base, of which she cannot be replenished simply because there's an entity growing in her womb. And at the same time, the occupation of that growth, it also blocking away, because that child requires that blood, requires that water for its amniotic fluid. That child requires the blood for its growth, and as a result of that blood cannot be fully, or the strength of that power of that blood cannot be fully accessed by that snake. So as a result of that, that child becomes an interruption, and that's why most witches don't like to be pregnant, simply because of this interruption. That is why when women stop having children, the power base now accelerates, simply because the interruption is ceased, simply because they no more continue in that trajectory of constantly being interrupted. So someone may ask, but when they hit menopause and they no more are able to bear children, how come the power accelerates? The simple reason is this: at that time the snake has been able to draw enough power within its lifetime to have gained the strength that it requires, and now it's now feeding off the life of others that it damages. Remember what I explained to you originally. That snake will require the power of the blood and the water that flows also from that womb in order for it to replenish its power base. But over time, it will be growing and it will be given assignments. And those assignments that is given is designated for it to go forth and execute and manipulate and destroy and ruin destinies. And by so doing, they are able to earn their crowns, or as it were, they are able to gain even more power. And at this point in time, they will no more require to draw blood from the womb from which they grew. Now they just need to feast on other people's blood. That's why you've heard the term clearly being said that witches suck blood. I remember a man I knew very well. His son was ill at some point and he was taken to the hospital. And everything the doctors tried, they didn't understand why this boy's blood was so frail and so weak. He wasn't just generating, his blood wasn't good enough, as it were. And yet he was eating well. He was not sick, as it were, from any disease whatsoever. He was just frail and weak. He wasn't growing as it was meant to be because he was a young boy. So this man of God felt, no, this is spiritual. It's more spiritual than physical. So he went into a fast and invited one or two men of God to join in the fast. And in the midst of the prayer, one of the prophets or the men of God who was in that meeting revealed to him that the house girl who was the nanny taking care of the small boy is actually sucking his blood. And then it now made sense, because if they are sucking life out of him from the spiritual realm, then he will lack the physical blood in his membrane. He will lack the physical blood in his body. At the end of the day, that boy did not need to be treated for anything. They got rid of the house girl immediately and sent her back to where they found her. They got rid of the nanny immediately and sent her away from where they got her, and that was the end. And the boy recovered immediately and his blood came back, because witches suck blood. So, but the ability to suck and leech on other people's blood from the spiritual realm, they don't have the ability from the incept. So from the inception of their manipulation, they have to depend on the blood in the womb. But over time, they become so skilled, and that snake becomes so big, now they now understand how it works. And that's why when witches kill people, they suck their blood from the spiritual realm. And many a times in the physical, those individuals, their blood is almost non-existent. And it's not, see, let me explain to you. Some of these things may sound very deep, but they're very straightforward. They make simple sense, because the life of the being is in the blood. The blood in itself is the physical, but there is a fluid that makes blood flow. Blood would have just been like cake, but because there is fluid in it, it flows. That fluid is water. Water is life. Demonic spirits, demonic satanic spirits, through the agency of witches, suck that life out. Because that life, by taking it, it gives them power. They replenish themselves. And that replenishment is what they require in order for them to function and do and execute. Because remember, the power, the strength, the size of the snake will regulate the type of assignment you can execute. It will regulate the type of power you have. It will regulate the dimension of the depths that you can go to and the things you can execute for the devil. And all these things are a functionality of the size of that snake. So that snake requires blood, and that's why witches suck blood. They do. And I can give you many examples, but I will just leave it there because this one has gone a bit too long. Now, my name is Mark the Lion, and I've been your host for Son of Elijah. Please do continue to listen in the following episodes, because I'm going to run this series about 6 or 7 episodes, because I want us to understand witchcraft, and because we are dealing with this problem every single day. But as you understand it, then I will tell you and teach you how to deal with it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for enjoying this program. Thanks for listening to another episode of Son of Elijah. If you want to be a part of what we're doing by partnering or giving, please use the link below, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.